Hi everyone, it's Lucy from My Crazy Craft Life, and today I'm here with the Scrapping for Less Flavor of the Month June 2020 card kit, and the theme is Walk in the Park. So to get started, I'm going to be going through the cards that I made. Those are the sketches that I used, and I also have the sneak peek in here where I made a slider card with no dies, that one right there. So I'm going to go through some of these a little quick because following the sketches is fairly easy, so that I can spend a little bit more time on the slider card to make sure that you're really seeing how that was done. So those are all the cards that I made. This first one is super simple. I am using collection number 1. It's Picnic Time, and you're going to receive Picnic Time paper by Scrapping for Less, Picnic Time stamp by Scrapping for Less, ephemera by Scrapping for Less, and then enamel dots by Gina Marie Designs. Now, I will tell you that I did not pay attention when I was cutting, and I ended up cutting this wrong. So I ended up having to use a different piece of paper, of pattern paper on there. So you know the old saying of measure twice and cut once? You should definitely do that, because I was cutting it at the right dimensions, but I didn't have it in the right way to make sure that the pattern was the correct way. So I ended up having to use something different, which I did not like. I just didn't like as much as the original one that I had picked. So those are the pieces I'm going to use. I just followed the sketch and I cut it out at those dimensions, and then instead of putting that center piece on, that's the 3 1/4 inches by 2 1/2 inches, I am going to use some ephemera, and I'm just creating a card base here with some of the white cardstock that came with the kit. And then I'm going to adhere all of those pieces down in the same way as the sketch. And then I'm going to, like I said, just use some of the ephemera. I'm going to use some of the, what am I using? Nouveau drops. So as part of the banana split level, you will receive everything that I will go through. That's part of the double dip. And then you're going to receive a tag die set by Scrapping for Less, Grass and Cloud stencil by Scrapping for Less, 2 mini bottles of Nouveau drops, and Sequins by Scrapping for Less. And so I am on here, I am going to be using the Nouveau drops as kind of the embellishment onto the card. And I'm not even going to end up using a sentiment out of this one, because I'm just going to use the ephemera that says Picnic Time. I picked one of those cute little ants, which ants are never cute, but these are actually kind of cute. But I'm not a fan of ants. And I will pop up that little ant just to give it a little bit more dimension, give it a little interest on the card. And that's going to be pretty much it for this card. And my next card is going to be made with the collection number 4, On the Playground. And with that, it's going to include On the Playground paper by Scrapping for Less, On the Playground stamp by Scrapping for Less, some green twine by Doris, Sequins by Scrapping for Less, and then enamel dots by Gina Marie Designs. And for this one, I'm going to be doing sketch number 2. And I'm just going to kind of figure out which patterns and which papers I want to use. I do end up just using a cardstock as the background. This paper is really bright. It's really got a lot going on, and with too many patterns, I just didn't want to do that. So I used some of the pattern papers that I cut out, and then I'm going to use some of the green cardstock. And the cardstock that is included this month is Red Hot, Brown or Craft, Lemon Drop, Black Licorice, Gumdrop Green, and Blue Raspberry. And you also receive 2 sheets of Neenah 110-pound Classic Crust Smooth Solar White cardstock and 4 A2 size envelopes. And that will all come with the double dip kit. So for this one, I'm just following the sketch. I used the strips that I cut out are about a 1/2 inch by 5.5 inches. It's not actually 5 1/4. It's 5.5 because it's going to be the entire length of the card. And I just cut out the 6 inches and then just snipped off the top so I could get it in the position that I wanted it to. Now I do use some Distress Oxides and some alcohol markers to color this image. I cut the image out on some white cardstock. It's about 2 3/4 inch circle. I am going to stamp the image with some Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And then I'm going to use the stencil that was included with the banana split level to kind of color up the background of this circle. Now I did make a mask, and I did actually cut out with my craft knife the slats or slits in the, like, for the steps to go up the slide, so that will actually get colored in as well. Now the Distress Oxides that I used was Tumble Glass for the sky, or not for the sky, but for the clouds in the sky, I guess. And the 2 colors for the grass I used were Lucky Clover and Peeled Paint. And that was it for that, nice and simple. And I just popped that mask off, and I'm going to keep it because I'll be able to use it again later. And then I just used a couple Copic markers to do a little bit of coloring on there. When I made the slide card, I made it like it was a steel slide, and I forgot they really don't even have those anymore, do they? I mean, that's what they had when I was a kid, and when you slide down it, it was hot as heck, and you'd burn the back of your legs in the summertime. But I don't even think that they make those anymore. I can't even think of a place where they have those around here. So when I colored this one, I decided to use like a plastic, a different color, so that it was more like a plastic slide like they have now. Then I'm just going to adhere those strips, and like I said, just cut them down. I do end up popping up the circle with some fun foam. I have some that has adhesive on the back, so I like to use that to stick it on, and then I just use glue to adhere the rest of it. And here, like I said, I'm just lining this up. I wanted the squares to line up, and it lines up perfectly for that 5.5 inches because each square is a 1/2 inch square. And then I just, like I said, trimmed off the edges there. To finish off the card, I'm just going to use some of the sequins that are part of this collection. And then to make the banner that came with it, I am going to use the sentiment from the stamp set. I just wanted to make sure that it was going to fit in there. And then I basically just cut about a 2.5 inch piece, and then I just kind of trimmed it a little diagonally, I guess, to kind of make that almost looks like a megaphone. And then I do end up stamping it on both sides because it didn't come out quite right. Excuse me. And then I just fishtail the end of that to create that, and I also end up popping that up with some fun foam as well. So I finally finished off my tape runner that I didn't like, and I used all the tape in it, so now I have the ATG, that pink one there. So this is, you'll see me learning how to use this. There's a little learning curve with using it because you have to click the button in order to get it to actually work. But I'm just using scrap pieces that I have that I've used on other things or cut stuff out of. So I do save the majority of them. As long as they're a decent size, I save them and just use them for things like this. And it ends up working out perfectly. So like I said, that is pretty much that is all for this card once I finish putting on those sequins. And then I will get over to the next one. For this one, I am using collection number 2, and that is Let's Hang Out. And you're going to receive Monkey Around Paper by Scrapping for Less, Let's Hang Out Stamp by Scrapping for Less, Green Leaf Ribbon, and Enamel Dots by Gina Marie Designs. So I'm going to end up using the Lemon Drop paper here, and this is a square card, and so I'm making it 5.5 inch square. So I cut down the 8-inch side to 5.5 inches, and then the 11-inch side will fold into that 5.5-inch square. I cut down a piece to 5.25 inches square so that I can have the border there and that little bit of yellow. I'm going to pick this little paper with the monkeys and all the bananas all over, and I'm going to end up cutting that down. Now I end up making, so I'm using sketch number 4, and I end up making it in the opposite direction. Because of the stamp with the monkey bars, I wanted that portion of it not to be vertical, I wanted that to be horizontal. So then I just ended up flipping the layering panel and then creating the image with the panel that's going to be horizontal. And I'm just going to stamp that onto a piece of white cardstock. I'm going to stamp it with Memento. I am going to do some Distress Oxide blending on here with the stencil, and I'm not going to mask this. I just felt, one, that it wasn't really that big of a deal, and I'm not putting a ton of color on here. So if you were going to put a lot of color, it would make a bigger difference. But since I'm making the monkey bars kind of grayish silver color, and the monkeys themselves are I'm making them brown, so having the little bit that I end up having on there isn't going to make that much of a difference. I do end up cutting 2 circles, one a little bit larger from some of the pattern paper, and the smaller one is just white, and I'm going to stamp the sentiment, "Let's hang out 6 feet apart." And I did cut that in half kind of with the sentiments so that I could split it up and put it onto the circle. And then that's going to be the sentiment that's going to go on there. So when I actually just pulled out the brushes, and I do end up pulling out the Distress Oxides, but I only end up using a little bit of the blue to give it a little bit more color than that was on the brush. But I didn't even end up opening the greens, so the greens are still kind of what was on the brush from when I did the last one. So this is just kind of the color that's still left on there. There's still a lot of ink left on the brushes. So especially when you're doing something this small and it's not a ton of ink blending and you're not looking for perfection going through it, with the ink blending you can really, like I said, just use that. So the colors that were already on there were that Lucky Clover and Peeled Paint, and then the Tumbled Glass for the sky. And like I said, the sky is not perfect. It does not have blue everywhere, but looking at the sky, it doesn't always look like that either. So that works out perfectly. I do end up coloring with some Copic markers, and those were the colors that I had picked that I showed you there in the beginning. And this is really simple coloring, just a couple, a 3-blend color, and just to give it a little bit of shadowing on there, because the images are fairly small and the monkey bars are very thin, so you're not going to be having to color these big large objects with this, so you can just get away with some real simple coloring here. And I'm just going to go through, add some shading there with the darker gray. I used all the cool grays for this one. And like I said, I do end up using the darker grays on the bottom where the grass was, because that, I tried to kind of stay away from it a little bit, but like I said, it's going to pretty much cover it up, and it'll end up being that darker gray as if it was in the shadows of the grass anyway. So it, like I said, when you're doing it that way, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect, and if you get some of the Distress Oxide ink on there, in this respect, it's not really going to matter much. So then I'm just going to adhere the panels down to the card, the back card panel, or the very first panel that's going to be on there. And I'm going to kind of measure everything up with that before I stick it onto the base of the card. And I'm just going to center that, like I said, going towards the bottom, so it's kind of in the opposite direction of what the actual card sketch shows. Then I decided that I didn't like the image just sitting there. I wanted the image to have a little frame around it, so I ended up picking up some pattern paper and just cutting out a piece that was big enough so that, you know, I had like 1/8 of an inch border all around. And I also cut out that piece that's a little larger than 1 inch, about 1.25 inches, to fishtail, just to have that small banner there up on the top corner. And I'm just going to adhere that image panel, the colored panel, onto the piece of pattern paper that I cut out to have that border on there. I'm going to adhere that to the card. I am going to then adhere the small banner up on the top there, and then I used some foam tape just to pop up the sentiment. I thought about using the leaf ribbon, but I decided not to. And then I'm going to adhere that entire panel onto the card base itself, and that is going to be it for that card. My next and my last card following these sketches, I am going to be using collection number 2, Let's Hang Out. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's the one I just did. I'm going to be using collection number 3, Pond Life, with sketch number 1. And with Pond Life, you receive the Pond Life paper by Scrapping for Less, Pond Life stamp by Scrapping for Less, and Tawny Owl papery, Yellow Daisies by Doris, and then Enamel Dots by Gina Marie Designs. I'm going to end up using the Blue Raspberry as a card base, and I had a hard time figuring out how I was going to cut this into the pattern that was on this sketch. So I cut it down to 3 inches, and then I cut it down to the 4 inches so that I knew I had that. And then you're going to see I'm going to actually move the paper trimmer. So I'm going to leave it about 1/2 inch at the smallest end. And then I'm going to pick up this trimmer so that I can kind of show you how I cut this. And what I did was I lined up, you know, I put right in the center 1/2 inch. I drew it in there. Just with on the opposite side that I was going to end up using. And I then just went from that 1/2 inch mark, you know, the tick mark that I put on there, to the, you know, corresponding corner. And then I did the same thing on the other side, from the tick mark, from that 1/2 inch tick mark to the corresponding quarter. So that's how I was able to make sure that I got that nice and straight. And then I didn't like the look of it without some type of background panel on there. So I kind of thought, with the blue raspberry looking like the water, and then these like cattails or whatever images are on here that are in the water, and then the paper with the frogs on there, I thought was super cute. So I think, you know, it kind of told the story that I wanted it to tell through the papers, and I thought that worked out really well. And then I am going to end up adding some Nouveau drops with that, and the sentiment I am going to end up using, I have a white circle that is already cut out that I don't even know what I had it from, and I'm going to end up using that. And I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp that sentiment. But then I also decided that I wanted it to have a background. So I looked through the papers. I found a paper that I liked, that I thought would go well with that, and it ended up being the green polka dots. And I cut that out from a circle die, and then the sentiment I actually cut smaller. So it was originally the size of that green paper, and then I just cut that down to the smaller circle and then added that to there, and, you know, adhered them together. And then I do pop that up with some foam tape. And I was just trying to get that straight. Then I end up using these flowers and some Nouveau drops on here to finish off this card as the final embellishment. I kind of thought about it and was like, no, I think it needs a little bit more. And I know they're random colors that you may get, so you can get different types of colors, and I got dandelion yellow, and now I can't even think of what the name of that one is. But it's kind of a peachy red almost, not quite red. It's more of a pinky, peachy kind of red. Now this is where I'm going to do the, what am I doing? I'm doing the slider card. So I'm not going to leave the coloring in here because there's really no reason for that. It's real simple coloring, kind of exactly what I did in the rest of the video, so I didn't feel that it was necessary to go through that again. But after I had cut it out, fussy cut these out, I do use the craft knife to cut the slits for the slide, and then the slits that are in the park bench, so that that is not showing, so that you'll be able to see in the background of that. And then I also take my black marker and I am just edging around all of the images and all of the cutout images. It's a good way just to cover up any issues or mistakes that you may have had, or if something isn't cut out exactly perfect, then you really wouldn't be able to notice it once you kind of put that edging around it. And it doesn't give it a frame because you're not doing it on that side of it, but it gives it enough of an area. Now, in order to make the slider portion with no dies, I am taking a hole punch and I'm punching 2, and I believe this is a 1/4 inch hole punch. Honestly, it is so old I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure it's about a 1/4 inch. And I'm putting 2 circles, or punching out 2 circles, where I want the mechanism to be, where I want it to slide up and down. And then I am going to just draw a line from each edge of the circle. And then I'm just going to use my craft knife and cut right down from circle to circle, and that's going to give me that track that it's going to go up and down on. And you'll see it's been a while since I've made one without a die, and so I cut this out and that was all perfect, but then I realized I had to adhere that to the pattern paper that I'm going to be using. And so then I realized I had to cut the piece of the pattern paper out, so I ended up doing the same thing on that. So if you decide to do this, make sure whatever you're putting on there, that it is adhered to the background or to the piece that you're going to be using, where it's going to have the track, because it'll need to be all the way across. And I made some hills, and I just used some pattern paper with this. The pattern paper is green with flowers on it, so I thought that was kind of perfect for the background, kind of like a park scene. And I just, made some up and down kind of hill things when I was with my scissors. You don't need dies to do all of that stuff. No, it's not going to have this, stitched edging and all of that stuff, but it works perfectly well. You don't have to have all of the different dies and stuff that are out there to do a lot of the same thing, and it really isn't any more work. Me popping a hole or 2 holes into this and then, cutting it down with the craft knife is not really that big of a deal. That it's, it does not take a lot of extra work or something that's incredibly hard to do. Because I forgot to adhere it first to the panel, it did, I did have an extra step here, but it's certainly not hard. And I just did the same thing, and with this I didn't even have to really measure because it was already there. I just had to make sure I kept it in the same area. So then all I'm doing is I'm going to end up cutting this piece down, and this is what's going to go behind the slide onto the paper, so that it looks like it's part of the slide when the frog is on it, but not in the entire area. So you're not seeing just a big gaping hole in the center of the slide. So I'm just going to adhere that right onto the other panel that I'm going to put down there. And again, for this one I did the same thing. I just kind of created my own hills in the background there. Now, one of the pattern papers on one side was a solid blue, and that's what I'm going to use for the sky, or kind of the background for the panel on the background of this. And I'm just going to adhere that. Now, this piece of paper is just a 4 inch by 5 1/4 inch, and that's what's going to go onto the card base itself. and then I'm going to adhere that panel, the kind of the hill panel, onto that card base, and then I am just going to trim down the edges of it. So I was just kind of deciding which hills I wanted where, and you know how much they were going to match up with the other ones, because obviously you want it to be a little bit different, so that you know you're kind of seeing some dimension in your card. So that's going to be the panel. Then to go back working on the slide, and I just kept kind of lining it up and trying to figure out where. And then I just drew a line in there so that I could cut this down and place that in there so that I knew how large I wanted that. And then I'm just going to adhere that back piece down there. And like I said, and that's so when that slide sits on there, it's going to look like it's all part of, you know, one piece, and that it's not, you know, have a big hole in it, like I said. So I cut that all down and it's all ready to go. Then I am going to, in order to make the sliding portion of it, I cut out 2 small circles with a circle die. Now you do not have to do that. I had a very small one, which I ended up having to cut it down anyway. But you just need something to kind of create that base that's going to hold it in. So it has to be larger than the track that you created, so that it doesn't pull out, so that, you know, the image that you're going to adhere to it doesn't pull out. And then I just made it, colored it with a little bit of the gray markers, just again, because that frog is a pretty small image and you might see some of that on there. Then I am going to kind of check out where I'm going to put the frog, and like I said, this is where I kind of cut it down some more. Now I'm using the pieces from My Favorite Things, and it's the circle pieces to have for the slider track. Now you do not have to do this. You can certainly just use those circles, you know, the paper circles. I put 2 of them together to give it a little more stability, and then you can use some foam tape. So it does not have to be the, you know, the My Favorite Things pieces to be able to make the slider mechanism and all that. You can use a penny. A lot of people use pennies when they do it. I just decided I didn't want to. Now, when you're putting the foam tape on there, I am only doing this a single layer, but you do want to make sure that you leave enough room for the track and for whatever piece you're going to put in there, whether it's a penny or like these, you know, are just pieces of paper that are there. You want to make sure that it has enough room to slide up and down and it's not going to get caught on anything. The other thing, when you are doing this, now I didn't quite cut it the size of the holes, and so I needed to cut it a little bit larger so that it slid easily on that track. So that's the biggest thing with making slider cards, is you just want to make sure that they move up and down, or however in a circle, however they're going, easily. Now the other thing is, you see I have my embossing tool, and if you put that on all of the areas that are going to have the slider portion, along with like the tape, the foam tape on the sides, that will make sure that it's going to slide easily and not have any problems sliding. And I put it on quite a few times. Then once I'm happy with that, I'm happy with all the tape, I'm happy where that back piece is positioned and everything, I am going to take all the tape off and get ready to put that slider portion in there. So I have the little slider on the circles, and the mechanism is already there on that piece of paper, or on the background, and I'm going to adhere that on top. So now you see it sliding up and down. Then I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to the top of that mechanism, that little piece, and just pop on my frog, and he's going to slide up and down. Now, if I would have made the slider a little bit different, like if I would have used the long slider pieces from My Favorite Things, or I would have made a, you know, a piece of foam tape that was longer and it wasn't the circle one, my piece wouldn't have been flipping around like this frog does. He kind of goes in a circle tumbling down the slide, which is okay, and I still think it's a fun thing. But if you want to make sure that it's not just spinning around aimlessly sliding down there, you make it a little bit longer. So it's still going to have to be that thin to be able to fit in the track, but if you make it longer, it won't be able to spin. Or if you're using like the My Favorite Things pieces, they have some that are longer and they won't be able to spin in the track. They'll just be able to slide up and down. But like I said, I use the circle ones, and I was kind of okay with it flipping around. Like I said, I thought it was cute anyway. Here I'm just stamping the sentiments, and I'm going to end up making a banner on 2 pieces and kind of offsetting them on the card. So I'm using 2 different sentiments that I'm going to put on there. I'm using the Missing You and the Let's Hang Out 6 feet apart from the other stamp set that was part of the kit. And like I said, I just end up bannering the sides or fishtailing the sides, only one side. And then I'm going to put one on one side of the card and the other on the other side of the card with the flat edges, the edges that are not fishtailed. The bench I am going to just kind of pop up on that second layer of the ground or the grass and the flowers. I do use some foam tape to adhere that top Missing You sentiment. The bench I'm just going to use some liquid glue, and then the sentiment on the bottom of the card I end up just using some of the glue. So that is it. Those are my cards for the flavor of the month, June 2020, from Scrapping for Less. Oh, I forgot I added some of these flowers to this as well. So I added some of those paper flowers that were part of the pond collection as well. But that is it. Those are all of my cards for this June 2020 kit blog hop. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure that you hop over to the next person in line and check out their cards. And head over to Scrapping for Less for all the subscription information. And I hope everybody has a great day and stays healthy. Take care.